It was 2016, so it was leading up to Worlds in Killeen. It was my first Raw Worlds, and I think it was the very first episode that we ever filmed of this like training log series. I'm like throwing my belt across the room and screaming curse words because I just like I'm coming to a head and dealing with this hip thing, and I was like trying to tell Dylan to turn off the camera. I'm like, dude, you don't film this. And he was like, no, this is the kind of thing like you need to, and we kind of, I think at that point really set the tone for a lot of how we've approached things over the years.
Welcome back to the Clinical Athlete Podcast. If you're not familiar with Clinical Athlete, we're a network of healthcare providers, students, and coaches who specialize in the management of athletes. You can find your nearest Clinical Athlete provider at clinicalathlete.com. We also have the Clinical Athlete Forum, where we discuss and share ideas and resources related to athlete health and performance. To join the forum, or for a potential listing on the Clinical Athlete Directory and for all upcoming seminars, webinars, and events, details can be found on the website. This podcast can also be found on your favorite podcast platform, and if that platform allows you to rate the show, we'd appreciate you taking the time to do that so that we can get this information out to as many people as possible. My name is Quinn. I'm a doctor of physical therapy in Orange County, California at Clinical Athlete Newport. On this show, we are joined by co-host Jared Maynard, who is the Clinical Athlete Continuing Education Director and Coordinator and a physiotherapist at Depth Physiotherapy in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. He is also a strength coach and a competitive powerlifter himself. And we have our other co-host, John Flagg, who is an athletic trainer and the powerlifting, weightlifting, and strongman coach at 301 Strong in White Plains, Maryland, and the owner of Rebuild Stronger, an online coaching platform for strength athletes. He is also a clinical athlete provider and the lead instructor of the Clinical Athlete Powerlifting Certification, which, by the way, we have some new powerlifting certifications coming up, so check out the events tab on the website. And our very special guest on today's show is Bryce Krawczyk. Bryce is an elite powerlifter with multiple national championships under his belt, as well as medals at the World Championships. We're bringing you a unique interview on this one. The topic of the discussion is the recurrent injury that Bryce has dealt with over the past several years and the things he's learned along the way. There are important and valuable lessons in this one for anyone who trains for any physical activity at any level. Hope you enjoy the show.
And we're back, everybody. Welcome back to the Clinical Athlete Podcast. And you might notice that it is not Quinn leading this conversation. This power feels really good. Quinn, is this how you feel all the time?
Well, not anymore, but yes.
Not anymore. You've usurped the
Congratulations.
throne. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I want to thank the Academy. Speaking of, Quinn, how you doing, man?
I keep muting myself. I'm doing well. I appreciate you asking me. It's a nice, beautiful day here in Southern California.
Many butterflies?
No, but some bees. I saw some bees today.
Whoa.
Yep. And
he's just trying to pull power back by dropping SoCal in there.
A couple crickets.
Like, oh, look, I live in beautiful Southern California. Let me give him some of that power back.
Representing Maryland and the tornado warning from earlier today. We got John Flagg.
Oh, it was windy. It was absolutely terrifying. And they told you, don't get in your cars. And I'm driving my daughter to school, and she's going, we're not supposed to be in the car right now.
You got a big car, though. You got an excursion, right?
I have an excursion.
Yeah, that thing ain't going nowhere.
It wasn't going to go anywhere at all. That is the single car that made American car manufacturers go, we probably need to do something different about how much gas we use. That's the car I drive.
But that's the one you want when there's tornado warning.
Yeah, but it drove through a tornado warning. So I'm doing great, Jared. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Excited about this conversation. And the man of the hour, we have fellow Canadian Bryce Krawczyk with us. Bryce, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm happy to be here. I listened to a few of the Clinical Athlete podcasts in the last week or so, doing dog walks and stuff. So I'm excited to be able to chat with you guys.
Excellent. Well, you're going to be bringing up the standard by a lot if you listen to a few of our previous episodes. So
absolutely.
I don't know.
And I, for one, appreciate having another Canadian here. So maybe we can set a couple of stereotypes straight. Do you ride your polar bear to all of your pickup hockey games, or do you take your car some of the time too?
It depends. It depends on the level of blizzard warning that we're facing. I feel like in a similar case to what John was saying, like you want something that's not going to tip, right? And the polar bear is usually the option on those days.
Absolutely. You got the extra warmth from the body heat too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Getting off road probably a little easier.
Yeah, it's tough to park in the igloo afterwards.
Right on. Beautiful. All right, so now the record's set straight.
Wait, hold on. Bryce, iPhone or Android for you?
Oh, dear.
iPhone.
Thank God. I'm sitting here with two
50-50.
droids. Okay. Now, now, what do you think now, boys?
I see the divisions being drawn now. The lines are drawn in the sand.
Yeah. Hey, Quinn, who was the one who had technical issues earlier today on our call?
I don't remember. It was a long time ago.
Convenient. Moving on. Bryce, so for our 6 listeners, can you give us a bit of background on yourself? Tell us about how you got into powerlifting, maybe what your competitive careers looked like so far, and then what projects you have your hand in, like the Calgary Barbell as company, YouTube channel, and all that stuff.
Sure. So I started competing in powerlifting in 2012 as an extension of just kind of falling in love with lifting and my quest to not be a skinny guy anymore, which I still think I'm battling with in some ways. Enjoyed some competitive success in the first 3 or 4 years, which kind of led to more of that passion developing. And around the same time, or I should say just before, began working in sort of a personal trainer kind of capacity. And that led to obviously becoming more and more specialized with my coaching in powerlifting. So I've been coaching for a number of years and competing for a number of years, and have enjoyed success up to the world level now at a few meets, and broken some world records and won some national championships and stuff. So it's been pretty cool, and getting to coach and work with fantastic athletes all the way from first time lifters to other world's competitors. And in terms of what I'm working on right now, we put out a lot of YouTube content pretty regularly. I mentioned earlier, we're doing some live streaming stuff nowadays. We're doing some apparel, and we're doing some program sales, and managing a team of coaches that kind of work under the Calgary Barbell umbrella. So that's perhaps a quick summary.
Got a lot of them to go, man.
You still, right now, you're primarily single ply, correct?
At the moment, yeah. I started my career lifting raw because of sort of when I started. I think we were starting to see a big insurgence of raw lifting and a real movement away from anything equipped. And then kind of got to a point where single ply started appealing to me. And then I got this idea that the World Games is a thing in my head. So yeah, we'll see how the next couple of years go.
Well, good luck, man. Your video series on like how to fit equipment and buy equipment and that sort of thing was actually one of the big catalysts that got me back into equipped lifting. So,
that's awesome.
It's a great series. So I loved it. And that's what got me back in a squat suit and a bench shirt. So
sweet. Pumped. Well, that makes me happy. I fancy myself part of this kind of like resurgence of what I'm calling the equipped renaissance over the last few years. Like a lot of people have been lifting raw for a long time and getting to kind of the point where I'm at and starting to see single ply as another option to kind of further pursue powerlifting in a different way.
Just on the topic of the YouTube channel, I've been a Calgary Barbell fan for a bit now, and that's grown as time's gone on. For anyone who hasn't checked out Calgary Barbell, please do yourselves a favor and check it out, because not only is the information fantastic, the production, you're welcome. The production quality is also just friggin' top notch, and it's been really great to watch that development. So that's mostly Dylan's work. Is that right?
That's all Dylan. I can't take any credit for any of that. The whole reason that everything looks good is my business partner, Dylan, who's become more and more a part of sort of everything as we move forward. But yeah, he is self-taught and pretty well a wizard with that kind of stuff.
And as an added incentive for anybody who's been a fan of the 90s PSAs, especially one about the house hippo, and if anyone wants to see Bryce in a tutu, you should search The Weight Fairy, Calgary Barbell.
Yeah, I watched that. That was a good time.
I watched that exactly an hour and a half ago because I was prepping for this, and I remembered that was a thing and watched it again. Don't regret it.
Yeah, that might be a little, is that Canadian specific?
It might be Canadian specific. Yeah.
I think it was like the Canadian Broadcast Association that put that one out. But yeah, if you remember that, it's it's fun.
Even with no context, it's worth a watch.
Yeah.
So, Bryce, one of the reasons why we started thinking about asking you to be on the show is because you've been dealing with an injury for a little while now. So can you tell us what that injury is, how it came to the picture for you, and then the impact that it's had on you as an athlete?
Sure. So the injury is still to this day kind of undefined hip pain experience where generally happens towards the lockout of both my deadlifts and my squats. And it started up, trying to think, maybe 2016, 2017. I still deal with it to this day. And there's kind of this stabbing pain. I had every MRI, X-ray, physio, chiro, massage therapy, like everything that I could imagine kind of under the sun. Nobody's been able to correctly diagnose it or really give me any kind of diagnosis. So it's just something that I kind of live with and work around to the best of my ability. But I've gotten to the point now where I'm able to pretty handily and consistently manage the symptoms to the point where I'm able to continue to train again and progress and hopefully soon will be beyond where I was when it kind of began.
With social media, obviously it's had a really positive impact, particularly in the sport of powerlifting, and it's probably one of the main reasons for the rate of growth that we've seen, and for the level of connectedness that a lot of people might feel with athletes that they don't live close to. And it's one of the main reasons why we're having this conversation now. One of my personal gripes is that most of the time we see the highlight reel of people hitting these monstrous PRs during training or in competition. And one of the things that I've appreciated a lot about just your openness when it comes to talking about this and detailing the process, because it really has been a process, and a long one at that, is that it, I think, gives, I don't know, maybe it helps to balance out the perception that a lot of people might have, especially if they're new to the strength training and powerlifting world. And maybe it gives people a bit of hope in that if they have an injury, and if it doesn't go away right away, it doesn't mean that's the end of the road for them. They don't have to throw in the towel.
Yeah. I think so. One of the things that kind of set the tone for our YouTube channel when we were first doing these training logs was 2016. So it was leading up to Worlds in Killeen. It was my first Raw Worlds. And I think it was the very first episode that we ever filmed of this like training log series. I'm like throwing my belt across the room and screaming curse words because I just like, I'm coming to a head and dealing with this hip thing. And I was like, trying to tell Dylan to turn off the camera. I'm like, dude, you don't film this. And he was like, no, this is the kind of thing, like you need to, and we kind of, I think at that point really set the tone for a lot of how we've approached things over the years with that little interaction, deciding like, no, we're going to show this and be like, yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows all the time kind of thing.
Absolutely. So when it comes to training, over the years, I mean, seems pretty self-evident to say it's had its ups and downs. What sort of modifications have you had to make, maybe to training as a whole, to accommodate or manage those symptoms, and any modifications you've had to make to the lifts or the movements themselves that seem to have been helpful?
So, I mean, from a mechanical standpoint, there seems to be some correlation with the way that I'm moving. If I can avoid certain patterns in my squat, I tend to more often have pain-free sessions. But honestly, the biggest thing for me has been getting into a trained state. So if I can get past that first week or two of like, this sucks, like really trying to have to manage the load and get past it and modify what I'm doing, I can get to a point where, okay, I'm trained enough. And this seems to be the biggest sort of conclusion that I've come to, is that if I can get strong, my hip doesn't hurt as much. So putting up with those first few weeks, managing and modifying load as needed, kind of allows me to get to a point where I can then continue to train. I took a big break after my recent competition in Dubai in November, I took 2 weeks off because I got my hand tattooed and just kind of like, I can't do anything, Mike. And then came back, and that was the worst my hip's been in years. So it was like, but I also knew, okay, if I can just bear with these first few weeks, then I can get to a point where things feel good again. So
there are two things in there that I think are interesting. One is the recognition that for you, being in a trained state is positively correlated with you being able to manage the symptoms better. And that might run counter to what people might expect to hear from coaches or healthcare professionals. If something's hurting, you should just probably not train or not train through it. Now, of course, we'll probably keep talking about this as we go, just given that pain and injury are really complex, messy things. And, we talk about that a lot here. So there's, I think with good reason, question about people trying to figure out what they should push through and what they shouldn't. And those are rarely easy questions to answer, certainly without knowing the person and their history and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But for you, you've recognized through the process that you can push through, and that not only can you, but you kind of need to get to that point where they're manageable, and then you can nudge performance forward. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second thing is I think expectation, where you took the time off from or after your competition in Dubai, and you expected that, all right, I haven't trained in a couple of weeks, things are probably going to feel kind of crappy. And again, we talk about expectations a lot in the training and rehab processes, and how that's important, maybe especially from the perspective of a coach or healthcare professional, to try to have those conversations and let people know, hey, this is probably what we're going to be encountering, and you might be able to set those expectations better or with slightly greater predictive accuracy once you start to work with that person a little bit more. But I think it all comes back around to people, the message being able to get to people that it's not always a terrible thing to maybe have some pain that's part of the picture. It's probably not fun, but it can be managed.
Yeah. I noticed pretty early on that it was frequent that I would come in and I would have my main comp squat on day 1. And by the time I would squat on day 3 or 4, I was in less pain, moving very similar amounts of weight. So it just kind of logically followed that, okay, over the macro scale as well, this happened. But I also don't want to give the impression that I just said, oh, whatever, it hurts, I'm just going to keep going harder, more like load it up. Because it was very much a process of limiting load to the point where I wasn't having as strong a symptom, or wasn't experiencing as much or as often or as on as many reps. So it was definitely a workaround as much as it was a work through, but getting to that point of being trained was the big thing for me.
Bryce, I'm curious because this is a really interesting point, and it sounds to me like you came to this realization on your own through the process of training. I'm curious what your interactions were with the healthcare providers, and you don't have to go into specifics if you don't want to or can't remember, but on average, you're seeing multiple healthcare providers, you're having conversations about this pain experience. Contrast your kind of conclusion that if I don't train at all, or if I don't train enough, I experience this thing to a greater degree. If I overdo it in some capacity, I feel this thing to a greater degree. There is this kind of Goldilocks zone or this dose response. Did you have those conversations with these healthcare providers kind of in that realm? And what was their general kind of recommendation in regards to the pain experience, or what was okay to push through, what you should avoid, that type of thing?
So, for the most part, I honestly don't remember a lot of it. It was 4.5 years ago now. But the one interaction that I think really set me off on the right direction was talking to a friend of mine, and you guys might even know Alex Kowaleski.
I know the name, yeah.
Yeah, so he's a PT, or was a PT in training at the time, and we had a quick little consult, and basically came to the conclusion that, like, if you want to keep continuing to pursue being an elite level lifter, some of these things might just be there. So it's about managing the symptoms. He recommended me some books on pain science. I think it was Explain Pain and Why Do I Hurt? And I made my way through those as sort of basic resources to try to educate myself on, what some of this stuff might be stemming from. And kind of just through a lot of experimentation and bouncing things back and forth. But I think one of the big things with a lot of the practitioners I saw previous to that was it was always searching for a sort of mechanism as to why it was happening. It was an imbalance, or it was maybe a herniated disc, or maybe it was this, and we need to try to treat that. And I think once I kind of let go of figuring out maybe what it was or why it was happening, it was just a matter of, okay, well, let's ditch all that, because that may or may not affect the course of treatment here. Like the goal is to get to squatting pain free. So let's just focus here. And that allowed me to kind of, have a bit of autonomy with things, kind of take charge for myself, stop relying on, okay, I have to go get an adjustment every week or twice a week, and just kind of focus on what I could do and what I was in charge of. And that made me feel like I was making some progress, which probably positively affected things.
It sounds like, to knowing what you were about and what mattered the most to you was probably the defining factor, or the thing that really sent you in that direction. And tell me if you agree with this too. It's not to say that it's wrong to want to know what factor or factors might lead or contribute to someone experiencing pain. I think that's probably a pretty normal response. Mm-hmm. But you hit the nail on the head as far as what goes through my mind as a coach and as a clinician and as an athlete. Is the answer to that question going to change what we do moving forward? And if so, how much? Because then that probably dictates how much time, effort, or energy we might want to put there. Mm-hmm. And I think from the perspective of a coach or a clinician, we should probably be asking people what they want for themselves, what success looks like to them. Yeah. Because that probably largely dictates what we do moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I think kind of coming to that conclusion, and I definitely don't think that just throwing away, looking for reasons why is necessarily the course. But for me, with where I was headed and where I wanted to be, it seemed like sort of a shedding of a weight in some ways.
Bryce, I think this is fascinating because you've come, it's been this years long process, and much of it is kind of mental as much as it is physical, as you're managing the physical
Absolutely.
symptoms, but also managing your expectations and beliefs behind it. Well, I'm curious if, let's say, the first 3 months or so, or no, let's say 2016, the session that you were throwing your belt on camera, just like this, I'm done. Like something needs to change. I need to figure this out. Yeah. In that moment, do you think that, let's say somebody kind of threw the Explain Pain book at you and had a conversation with you, it's like, let's not worry about structure right now, and let's talk this out in regards to prognosis and kind of managing as opposed to finding a quote unquote fix. Do you think you would have been ready to hear that at the time?
That's I think a really good question, and obviously impossible to answer, but I think that it would have sped things up. I think I would have ended up in a better place quicker. I don't know if at that point I would have been ready to hear that without kind of exhausting some other options first. I've over the years have prided myself on being able to sort of adapt as new information came up and have my mind changed. And I used to, as a coach, also think very sort of mechanistically, like, don't round your back, you're going to blow yourself out deadlifting. And, as things advance, we kind of gotten past some of those like one-to-one notions. But at the time it was, I definitely wanted to figure out what was wrong with me so that I could fix it. And it was less about these sort of gray areas and management and those kinds of things. But I do think that having that information would have probably sped up that process pretty significantly. Yeah.
Now, realistically as well, since 2016, have you had a session where you threw your belt and ran around the weight room a little bit cussing?
I've been pretty close, I think, and probably more recently than I care to admit. but again, like the more times I come back into these, I don't know how much you know about the sort of emerging strategies, bottom-up periodization model that Mike T uses. Mike T's been my coach for 4 or 5 years now, but we have these sort of intensive phases of training, development blocks, and then we have a washout or a pivot, which is lower intensity training, essentially a deload. So often coming back after these deloads, my first week in, if I don't manage my expectations in terms of, where I'm at and take my condition or whatever you want to call it into consideration, I can come out of the gates really hard and run smack dab into that. Like, no, you need to be a little more well-trained before you do this. So I still every so often run into that. But I think that's just the nature of wanting to, try to get that leg up on myself.
But we're still not talking about something that's a linear process. It bounces around a lot. It's something you constantly have to stay relatively cognizant of. Yep. And those expectations have to be matched with really kind of where you're at, which is a super difficult thing to do on a daily basis. I think athletes struggle with that a lot because they expect things to be very linear. They expect it to just be gone, and I've done all these things, and it should be away by now. Where instead it's more like, hey, I just traveled across the country and I'm on little sleep. My nutrition's not where it really needs to be. I've got all these other stressors, and now, I've got a couple more symptoms going on than before. Okay, there's a lot of things that go into that. Yeah, not just this straight line. So.
Yeah. And I think, again, like social media might be partially responsible for that, with the number of, I think, like hidden injuries that powerlifters go through. I think a lot of people are really hesitant to share those things, and whether they see that as a competitive disadvantage, admitting some kind of weakness publicly or not. I mean, that's all that goes off in a whole other topic into the weeds about whether or not you can, it's your right to sort of present yourself as you see fit and et cetera. But, yeah, I think people see a lot of people not getting injured, or they have, blow their knee apart and then 2 weeks later they're squatting a PR, and things like that. And those are the kinds of things that people share and emphasize and talk about. But it doesn't as often get brought up like, yeah, no, I'm still dealing with this thing from 4 years ago. And, some days it still sucks, and you just have to realize that in the general trend, we're headed the right direction kind of thing.
Just thinking about managing expectations and sort of flexibility or agility within one's approach to training. We had Andrew Patton on the podcast a little while ago, who ran a study with Greg Nuckols, looking at, it was a year-long survey-based study, looking at training history and just tracking trends within those who started off or who either gained or incurred some sort of injury based on their definition, and I forget what their definition exactly was, or started off with some sort of injury that required some sort of modification. And what they found generally was that it was much more likely that people who started off with needing to modify training as a result of a prior injury were much more likely to drop off out of the study. And that, Andrew talked about how it could have been due to multiple factors. I ended up being one of those people who was part of the study and also started with an injury. And as you were talking there, it echoed a lot of the same sort of sentiments that my coach and I have had. I've been dealing with sort of a persistent hamstring type issue that bugs me on squats and deadlifts. And it's I think probably the biggest change that's happened for the better over the last couple of years has been just accepting that I need to be flexible with my expectations for a particular training day or training block or performance, and how if I think that something's going to go a certain way and it's not, how it doesn't need to necessarily be shut down, record the L. We can take a lateral step or take a step back and try to get some sort of win, whether big or small, out of it. Which is a segue into another question I want to ask, related to goals. We've been talking about the process, through this whole thing.
Yeah.
And athletes in general are going to have performance-based goals for themselves. For strength athletes, it's probably numbers they want to hit in training or on the platform. Yeah. We've also talked about how it's an unpredictable process, especially when there's an injury present, but you can make a pretty strong case that that's the case even without an injury. So then we hear about how having process-oriented goals also ends up being an important thing. So if we delineate between the two, maybe a performance-based or outcome-based goal is a destination that we're trying to get to. A process-based goal is the journey or the way in which we're trying to reach those destinations. So for you, have you found that setting process-oriented goals has been an important thing or something that you've thought about much? And if so, do you find that it's ever difficult, or do you find yourself sort of weighting the two types of goals differently? Like, do you find yourself kind of putting a little more value in the outcomes unintentionally sometimes, as opposed to, hey, here are the process-oriented things that I can work on right now? I don't know if that question makes sense.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. I think we all kind of fall into that trap more often than we maybe like, thinking about, okay, the outcome and sort of the performance goals. I think for me, like there was a very big shift to sort of short term and those performance goals, instead of, okay, I need to go in and squat X weight at whatever RPE, was I want to go in and have like a relatively low pain day. I want to go in and do whatever I need to do to have a low pain day. And sometimes that was getting really frustrated, walking away, training a couple of clients, coming back to the bar, rewarming back up. And then, lo and behold, for whatever reason, I had no pain. I was able to get through my whole session, prescribed weights, everything like that. There were days like that. And having that goal of, okay, pain-free session, as opposed to this weight, allowed me to kind of develop more process-oriented goals based on, okay, quality of movement, amount of warm-up, where's my headspace at? Am I looking for my pain when I'm trying to get into these positions, or am I thinking about my performance and just focusing on doing the work? And those kinds of sort of process-oriented thoughts helped me, I think, start to develop a habit, or start to develop many habits that led me to being a bit more successful and back to the point where now, like I have spreadsheets set out of all the E1RMs I want to hit this block and where I'm going to try to be for nationals in a few weeks and this kind of stuff. And it's exciting to get back to that, but I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been able to take a step back and be like, look at what's, kind of right in front of you before we start thinking about your next meet. And I also did a bad job of that. Like I kept competing. I did a number of other meets. I squatted the same weight in every raw meet I did for 2.5 years because I knew that I just couldn't push my raw squat without giving it the adequate time. But like, okay, we're 4 weeks out. We got to start hitting this weight and that weight. And it just like, this is the ceiling. I think we're starting to get past that, but it was a back and forth process for a long time.
Did you have, with your interactions with your coach, with Mike, through this process, was this kind of I need to figure out where I'm at with this myself, and coach is just kind of on the outside, assuming that you'll give him feedback if needed, or was this very much a kind of a team-based process between you and him to be able to figure out how to manage this?
I think it was a little bit of both. Mike was obviously very collaborative. He actually has had basically what I have in one hip, he has in both, and it kind of goes back and forth. And he's had to take a step back from competing and has complimented me by saying that, my dealing with this process has helped him sort of think about his own injury differently. And now he's back to the point where he's hitting some PRs in training. But it was definitely a thing where I needed to kind of come away, work on these things myself, and then come back and we'd sit down and have a pretty in-depth discussion about what worked and what didn't. Sometimes on the day I needed to just blow up his Facebook Messenger inbox and be like, I can't do this. And then, 3 hours later, I'm like, well, I warmed back up and it felt good. So I did all of the everything. But yeah, I mean, he was very much there every step of the way. And having dealt with and was currently dealing with some things similarly, I think there was a level of sort of sympathy, empathy, in his approach, which helped me a lot.
Bringing it full circle, I have to imagine that going through all of that yourself gives you maybe a unique perspective as a coach now working with your clients. How have you found, or have you had to have that conversation or those conversations with people where you maybe sort of gently nudge them in the direction of, it's good and still useful for us to have these goals that you want to hit, these numbers that you want in training, or this vision for this upcoming competition. But here's where we are right now. It might behoove us to, be a little bit more flexible or think about, variable X, Y, and Z. Have you had to have that conversation at all or much?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of those things that I'm so thankful that I've been able to have and deal with and really dig through the trenches with, because I have these conversations with athletes regularly. I have a guy prepping for nationals here in Canada, and he's got an adductor issue, and things were going really well, and it flared up really bad. And it was one of those, okay, like you're squatting your bench and your deadlift are fine, but squat, just put that number out of your head and let's try to get moving pain-free. And you'd be surprised what can happen in a few weeks if we can just get to the point where we're not hurting every session. And being able to just have that, I think, calmness and a bit of a demeanor of, trust me, this is going to be okay. We're going to get through this. And obviously, I stay in my lane and I, work with load management and those kinds of things that I think as a coach, I'm more qualified to give more advice and impact. But it definitely has been a big boon to be able to relate that experience and even give myself as an example a lot of the times. I felt that way. I feel that way. I've been there. Let me tell you what helped me, and here's some resources. Lend them my books.
Yeah. Well, even to that point, it's been apparent as we've been talking here, and it's certainly apparent in the videos that you put out on YouTube. You're pretty deliberate in the language that you use when you're talking about pain and injury. I'm guessing that's a conscious process.
Yeah,
or choice
very
for you.
much so.
What prompted you to start, or has it always been that way, or was there a particular thing that pushed you to be more aware of the words that you were using to talk about these things?
I think that in dealing with my own injury and learning a lot more about pain science and the biopsychosocial model and beyond, yeah. It sort of dawned on me that the way that you describe things, the way that you frame things, the languages are sort of way of relating to the world, and you can very easily change a situation and the outlook on a situation by choosing your words carefully. And again, going back to, especially as I relate to clients, I try to really make sure that we're presenting things in an open-ended way or a more positive light or being helpful as opposed to anything else. So yeah, I don't know if there was any one moment or if it was something that kind of gradually happened as I struggled or tried to educate myself more on these things. But yeah, it definitely is a very, very conscious choice.
Which is excellent to see, because as I was prepping these notes, I was going to say, that it's not always the case that people are conscious about their language. What I would actually say is that you're in a very small minority of people, at least as far as the strength and conditioning world, based on how I perceive it, who is regularly really conscious about the language being used. I think more often than not, we can see situations where there's language that's a little bit too absolute to be appropriate, kind of being thrown into these conversations when things are so unpredictable and terms are so nebulous and all of that. Or even what you said before, you stay in your lane and you make the choice to work with what you feel qualified to do. And I don't know if everybody does that. I would hope they do, but I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that working with people like Mike, I don't know, have you guys said you had Mike on the podcast?
We did. Yeah, it's great.
I think maybe
a really long time with him.
Yeah, it's easy, right? He just has a lot to say and he's a brilliant mind. But having conversations with people like Mike, chatting with Bryce Lewis, and just noticing how people will, if you need to take a second to pause and think about how you're going to phrase something, do it, and having more of those interactions. The more I talked to smart people, the more I realized they were being very conscious with how they speak. And, I strive to be a smart person. So yeah.
But Bryce, that's not what gets the Instagram clicks.
Bryce, powerlifter.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey guys, Quinn here. Consider this a little brain break from our awesome discussion with Bryce Krawczyk about how he's managed a chronic injury. Just some quick updates in the clinical athlete world. We've got some barbell certifications popping up. The Clinical Athlete Powerlifting certification is coming to the East Coast, West Coast, and Canada in 2020. So check out the events tab on the Clinical Athlete website for more info. We're also teaming up with the Level Up Initiative to bring an amazing educational event to Boston on September 19th, Boston, called the CALU Summit. For more information on the summit, head over to CALUSummit.com. That's CALU Summit.com. Lastly, the Clinical Athlete Forum has been popping with new discussion, and we just dropped 2 new webinars: Programming for Hypertrophy in the Clinic by Dr. Eric Lagoy, and Long-Term Athlete Development and Sports Specialization by Dr. Nicole Sertica. So go in there and consume the brain gains. You can also find the links to all this stuff in the show notes of this episode. And now, back to the show.
I want to take a moment and really kind of highlight how important this is for barbell sports, just this mindset. You mentioned your very first video, you guys decided to keep that in there, throw the belt across the room, cuss, show frustration. We touched a little bit before about social media and, coaches and athletes kind of hiding injuries, but there was also, on the other side of that, we were very polarized because you had that and you also had like hashtag Snapcity and a lot of like the fear mongering when it comes to particular movements like you were talking about with any little bit of flexion in the spine was like, oh, here we go. Yeah. It's done. It's very important that we be as realistic and careful with this stuff as we can, because a lot of the barbell sports, because of that old, kind of dogmatic polarization, people have fear of them. Like, oh, I don't want to get hurt doing powerlifting.
Yeah. And
I hear that a lot. It makes me cringe a little bit because I know how protective these sports can really be, especially as we get older. So it's important to take this kind of direction to grow the sport because it's more realistic. It's more, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it out loud. It's more honest. Because if you are a CrossFitter or an aerobics instructor or a yoga instructor, you're probably going to deal with these same things. You're just doing a different task. It doesn't mean that you're never going to feel pain. And I think in our sports, a lot of people, as soon as that sensation happens, it's, oh no, this sport hurt me. I have to stop.
Yeah.
Couple things. Think sorry, Bryce.
Go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, I think it comes down to like the degree of, there's that spectrum. And I've often used this example of sort of health and performance, right? And I feel like most people are here on this end where they're untrained. And if they just got to like a body weight squat or whatever sort of arbitrary metric you want to use, they would probably be healthier in everyday life. And I think once you get past that, yes, you end up having to deal with some of these things and you end up, pushing the limits of the body, and whether that's in powerlifting or swimming or shuffleboard, I don't know. You probably end up having to deal with these things once you go beyond that threshold and you're pushing the envelope of what you can physically and mentally do. And I don't think that it's exclusive to powerlifting. So I think it's great that people are starting to realize that. And we have a strong contingent of masters lifters, and we try to bring in, we have a Women of Steel event every month where we're trying to bring in a female population who's maybe otherwise intimidated by a gym like we have. And create that space where people can come in and experience training for the first time, as well as the same thing with a lot of masters and aging population, kind of getting into doing their own versions of squats, benches, and deadlifts. So it's cool to see that grow and that mentality kind of open up.
That's awesome, man. Quinn, what were you going to say?
Yeah, just a couple things that are going through my head as we're going through this is I hope when people are hearing this and they're hearing Bryce talk about things, they're not saying that, oh, well, he's a world champion, so this doesn't apply either to me or my clients or these types of things, because there's nothing really that's been said that is somehow in the echelon of elite performance necessarily. The difference is Bryce can take it to that level of performance. He just happens to have that ability. But the process that he has gone through, I have people on my caseload right now that are going through similar processes, and they're coming back and they're struggling to kind of formulate these thoughts in their head. And we talk about these very things all the time. And these are people of all different levels of physical activity. And I think it's just so challenging as a clinician. I'm thinking about this from our side when we talk about words, how choosing our words wisely. And it's so easy for a clinician to know that they have this small amount of time with this person who's expecting something. You know, they came into the door and they expect to get help from an expert, and I've got a finite amount of time. What do I say? And it's real easy to fall into the trap of providing false promises. But at the same time, you don't want to snatch all hope. And it's just such a delicate conversation. You know, if you were in my office, your issue, the way that you're describing it, could have very easily just gone away on its own, because a lot of things do. Yours just happened to not. Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, as a clinician, you just can't, it's so hard to predict that. And so with that uncertainty, like, let's say it's an acute ankle sprain. From a probabilistic standpoint, I'm pretty sure, especially if it's your first one, like, this is going to go away on its own. It's going to heal and you're going to be fine. But what if you're one of those and that's not the way it happens? And I gave you this like set timeline. Oh, in 6 weeks, this is going to be like a, you know, in the rearview mirror, you're going to be completely fine. And then it doesn't work out that way, and you kind of have to backtrack a little bit. And so when you're speaking on, you select your words carefully when you're talking about these things, Bryce. I'm just thinking about that from a clinician standpoint too, and how important that is, and how challenging it can be to have that small amount of time. And you know, I just try to tell people, if like, let's say it was you know, I don't know where you're going to be, but you said something that was really important, I think, in the beginning, is you'll have these ups and downs if you really zoom in on the day-to-day, and hell, even the hour-to-hour, as you described. Mm-hmm. Some days you feel shitty in the morning, and then you come back and you crush it, or even vice versa.
Yeah.
But if you can try to look at the overall trend and have some, it's okay to have some KPIs that are objective and quantifiable. Like, this is a quantified sport, you know, it's something that you're looking at the numbers eventually. Mm-hmm. But if you can kind of just take that overall picture, I think that's huge. But you know, it's hard to formulate this into a question, but I think you've just brought up the part of the existential crisis that at least I have as a clinician, just the challenge of having these conversations with somebody who's, you know, living it on the day-to-day.
Yeah. And I think if you don't have the time to have a conversation like we're having, where it's, you know, we have an hour, you know what I mean? I don't know how much time you guys have with your patients and that kind of stuff. But I think that the timeline concept and the idea kind of mirrors the strength training element in itself, right? You stack up those sort of small wins, and then eventually you look back 2 years down the road, or a year, 6 months, whatever down the road, and you're like, oh, I've gotten a lot stronger, or, oh, I'm in a lot less pain now. But it's not one of those things that like just kind of clicks. It's not like a light switch or a binary kind of thing, right?
So, and patient education has been studied. So now that the science of pain is coming more to the forefront, we're starting to take these things seriously. There's been some recent papers looking at, well, what does a bolus of patient education about pain science and about these things do? Or what does cognitive behavioral therapy about pain, does that have an effect? And what they're finding is that when you sit somebody down and just have like an hour conversation or a 2-hour conversation, and you just dump all of this stuff on somebody who's in this lived experience, it doesn't work out all that great.
Yeah.
And I also think about, well, how do we learn anything new, and how do we change behavior in general? Is it all of a sudden we have a new belief or we learn something new? It's like, no, we're exposed to it in small bits. And I think I'm thinking about your experience and your process of just honing in on what works from a mindset standpoint and from a training standpoint, and failing and succeeding, and then you learn from the successes and the failures, and that kind of updates your process and your beliefs, and then you go forward. And I think from a clinician standpoint, it's that way as well. And we've talked about it on the podcast, where we don't try to flip somebody's world upside down right in the very beginning with patient education. It's just insert a little bit of little tidbits here and there, like, oh, here's a book, like with you. I was, I'll read this book, okay. And then you have these little conversations. Oh, what'd you think about that book? Maybe it's a couple minutes in the next session. And I think from a cumulative standpoint, it sticks a little bit better when people hear it multiple times a little bit, and they have time to wrap their heads around it, rather than it just being like a vomit of, here's pain science.
Yeah, I can see how that would be overwhelming.
So I just appreciate you coming on and sharing that, because I think this is really, really helpful for all parties involved.
Yeah, I hope so.
How many people have we had on that say stacking up little wins? I want to start keeping track of that.
Well, it's like habit formation science. It'll tell you that too. You change little things at a time, and then you layer that on.
You nailed it, because we're talking about that process, and it's, you get in. You're trying to change your squat pattern or get a little bit more efficient. And each training session is, okay, I figured this little piece out. You didn't figure out the whole thing. You can't, if you're coaching somebody, you can't cue everything in that one session. Or they just fall apart. They look at you like their brain melted. It's kind of the same thing here. It's like, okay, so I came in, the morning sucked. Just didn't feel great. Chill out. I'm going to go over here, train a couple people, and to get back underneath the bar. And hey, you know what? My feet a little bit wider. I feel better right now. So let me just take that. And now next time I train, I have that option, and maybe my normal stance feels good, and maybe I can go with that. You just learn little things along the way, and you stack up little wins in training, getting better as an athlete. But when it comes to managing this stuff, every exposure that you can get those little wins also helps you along that path of understanding your pain experience and what's going on with you, and how you can modify your training, or at least manage this a little bit better. So it's just one of those it's a key concept we constantly come back to. I just love to highlight, because God, I say it every day. I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bryce, was the transition from raw to equipped, was the injury part of the impetus to doing that?
It was actually. So I found that when I switched from conventional to sumo, I had no pain. I have now had some painful days pulling sumo, but the initial switch was just night and day. No pain, train as hard as I wanted, no issues. So that was a big thing. And then, we were at a coaching summit. I was presenting alongside some other coaches from Alberta, and actually Mike T and Bryce Lewis were there. And one of the guys presented this or gave a talk about equipped lifting, and this is why it's cool, and this is why I do it. And he brought his wife in and stuffed her into a squat suit, and something in me was like, oh, maybe, so I tried it out, and I found that, 9.5 times out of 10 in my suit, I had no pain. I could squat, I could deadlift. The bench shirt was a whole other thing that took a few years to figure out, but the squat suit and the deadlift suit just instantly, I don't know if it's because there's so much other stimulus that I'm just like not thinking about it, or what, may contribute to that. Maybe there's some sort of symmetry in the bracing, or God knows what. But anyways, I don't have any pain in my squat suit. I would say there's probably, I could count on one hand the amount of times I've had pain in my suit in the last 3.5 years. So it was an experiment that kind of allowed me to, it was an experiment that kind of worked. And the big thing was it allowed me to continue pushing my training and be able to take my raw training and say, okay, like let's dial this back. If this session hurts raw, whatever, we'll use less weight, we'll manage this. And then I could get into the suit and be like, let's go, and shake the bar and huff ammonia and listen to metal and, do all that stuff that I love to do. But it kind of allowed me to differentiate those and focus more on this process being a kind of getting back to pain-free, as opposed to I need to perform, I need to numbers, I need to, progress.
I found the same thing with my experience in the squat suit and even just briefs. It's you could push a little bit more, and I'm with you, man. I don't know why. I think it's just the overwhelming amount of pressure and stimulus just overrides your brain.
Yeah.
It's just, what is happening right now? Even like a size or two up, it's just it's different. But being able to kind of use the suit to overload and train around a couple things, and it mentally for me it was a big help. And I'm with you. I'm still trying to figure out the bench shirt, but the squat and deadlift suit have definitely been a game changer. Have you found that they actually helped with your raw lifting as well?
For my bench, actually, I feel like it's had a positive impact on my bench. I think a fair bit of my bench was learning how to kind of transition into the top end of the lift properly. I would kind of always get pinned in that mid-range of motion and just couldn't, get things in the right place or push hard enough, or just didn't make sense up here for whatever reason. And getting, 80, 100 kilos more than my raw max in my hands and pressing it over and over again kind of made that click, or made my triceps stronger, or whatever. Maybe even just psychologically, my raw lifts didn't feel like much in my hands anymore. But I did find it had some carryover for my bench. I'm not so sure about the squat and the deadlift. I don't really know. I'm still not really pushing those raw too hard. So because my focus right now is obviously just on equip. So I don't know. A little bit yes and a little bit not sure.
Fair.
I wanted to bring it back to the point we were talking about before when it comes to sort of journeying with people through the messy, muddy waters of training in the presence of injury or pain. One of the things that I think is difficult, just as a clinician and a coach, because I think this is equally present on both sides of that line there, especially for someone who's new to working in either field or both fields, is at the end of the day we still have a person in front of us who's asking us for help, and they want to walk away with something that they feel is worthwhile and that they can start to do. When we're trying to give them information that's as accurate as we can provide, without defaulting to the nice, quick, snappy one-liners that don't quite do justice to what we understand or think about, pain or injury, that's tough, because oftentimes we feel like we're left with a question mark. We kind of give that question mark to the patient or the client. Hey, what do I do, coach? But sweet, So I think that's part of the finesse of being what I'll call a good coach or a good clinician, is being able to maybe suggest and show the client that we can live in this uncertainty for now, and here are the things that we know or that we highly suspect. Let's just do this and see how we go. Now, that said, I would probably argue that's easier to do in person, only because you have the ability to probably better discern each other's nonverbal communication and be present that way. Yeah. The next thing would probably be something similar to this, or even other modes of online coaching. Bryce, you've I think got a pretty decent challenge insofar as Form Check Friday, where you've got an email and then a video of their lift, and you have to provide some sort of direction for them. And this is all while you by your own admission, are thinking about trying to be careful of the language that you're using. How's that go? That's got to be fun.
It's interesting. We for the most part try to stay away from submissions where somebody's like, oh, like this hurts or that hurts, or I'm having this pain or whatever, because a lot of times it's like, we need to sit down and talk for a long time before I can give you any sort of advice on that. But if it's, a novice to intermediate lifter making some pretty obvious faults, I feel like for the most part, I can offer a bit of helpful advice to get them closer to this sort of model of what like an efficient technique might look like. while also trying to, it's kind of like you said, and I think it comes down to, you said you don't want to give them those snappy one-liners. And I also think that it's tough to not just always be like, well, it depends.
Yes.
And just leave people with that, right? So I try to give the it depends answer, but then kind of be like, well, it depends on this, and this.
Yeah.
And here's how you find out which of those is, or try these things. And again, it's a lot in the language. I'm not saying do this and you will be better. I promise this will be fixed.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, if we think about your grip width here, this is the reason I'm looking at that. And maybe if you go wider, we can change this, that, and the other thing. And it's sometimes a shot in the dark, but I think it's been more successful than not. And it's pretty cool to have a lot of people able to look at that and then kind of use that same model in their own training and say, okay, well, maybe I kind of deadlift like that guy. So if I try these cues, how does that work? And I think framing it in that idea of it's an experiment, not do this, it will be better, but try these things. And, if this works, then maybe this. But coming up with more of those if-then statements than like just saying, this works, do it.
Right. Yeah, we had Greg Lehman on the show a while back, and he said more or less the same thing about it depends, where that can be kind of a cop-out answer. And it might be true, but his challenge was to people who want to use that to qualify it and say, okay, what does it depend on, in fact? No, I love that. That's great, man. You mentioned metal before, and I told you I was going to ask you about metal. You seem like a metal connoisseur.
I'm wearing a Shadows of Intent shirt right now.
I noticed that.
That was not long ago.
That was excellent. Who are you really digging these days? Listening to a lot of.
Listening to a lot of deathcore right now. Die Art is Murder, Fit for an Autopsy, Enterprise Earth, and Aversion's Crown are all coming here in April. So I've been listening to pretty much their whole libraries. A lot of Shadows of Intent. That's a short list. I could probably do a whole other podcast if you want to talk metal.
That's awesome.
Quinn has no idea what's going on right now. I was
going to say, Quinn, do you listen to metal at all?
No.
And that's why Bryce is stronger than you.
Yeah,
there's other reasons.
You can't do that with weightlifting. It's got to be either like club music or like nothing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just a silent.
Yeah.
I have enough inner turmoil going on in my head that I don't need it coming from metal.
That's it. And again, I'll try not to make us talk about music for too long. But Bryce, you were the singer for a band for a while, right?
I was, yeah. I did vocals. I don't know if I call it singing, but I did vocals in a likewise styled kind of thrash metal band for a bit.
That's awesome. Well, for me, as far as evolution of musical taste, if you had asked me about metal 6 years ago or longer, I probably would have said that I didn't listen to much, excepting a few songs. But that's kind of grown over the last little bit. Listened to a lot of metalcore and then other subgenres of metal, and developed a lot more of an appreciation for metal vocals. Do you still mess around with that?
In my car on the way to the gym the odd day, I'll turn it up pretty loud. I don't know that my wife's ever heard me actually do them in person. But wow, what is this?
It's one of your performances.
Yeah, that's a different kind of performance. But yeah, it's fun, and I think it was one of those things that kind of parallels lifting in some ways for me. It was a very intense expression and sort of cathartic to get up on stage and stomp around and scream at people. And I think that lifting kind of provides me a very similar outlet. And I'm not like a pent up or angry person, but I think part of that is because I've always had a really good way to kind of channel all that stuff and be able to be that and do that for periods of time when I need to or when I want to. But yeah, that was a pretty cool experience, which also led to the feelings of terrible health that got me into lifting. So
there you go. I train at home in the basement, and in the last month or two, my daughters had heard some of the music that was being played, and I think one of them had said, "Daddy's music, scary." And my wife told me that later. And I said, well, There's time. They'll come around.
So what are you listening to? What are your albums on the go right now?
Moana, Frozen 2, Frozen 1.
John also has kids. Yes, you'll notice that. Listen to a lot of metalcore, probably more than anything. So Architects, Killswitch Engage, As I Lay Dying, some of their new stuff. Also want to shout out Cameron Troppel. He's a physical therapist in the States, also part of the clinical athlete community, because he shot me a list of bands to check out, and Die Artist Murder is one of them. Mm-hmm. I've heard a couple of their songs, so this is probably just more motivation to go check out more of their stuff.
Yeah. I would also check out, if you're into that style, Straight from the Path, if you haven't. They also put out a new album last year. Again, I could do a whole podcast on this, but that's one that comes to the top of the list when you mention those artists. So I would check out Straight from the Path.
Excellent.
Spotify is updated.
All right. So we like to try to close out most of our episodes with a summary of actionable things people can start thinking about and start doing to maybe help themselves, or certainly to better serve people that they work with. Mm-hmm. Just broadly speaking, any suggestions for people who work with athletes in pain, like coaches or clinicians, or for athletes who are dealing with injuries or nagging pain themselves?
So funny, quick little story, but I actually had to was lucky enough to give a presentation to a lifter's grade 8 strength and conditioning class. So a lifter from the community, as a teacher, got to teach this class on strength and conditioning, wanted me to give a quick presentation, and then they have a weight room, so we went in and did a bunch of that stuff too. But I was like, okay, I need to try to distill some of these sentiments down to a grade 8 level. And I think the biggest thing I came up with was just to find a starting point. And I think that's whether you're a clinician or a coach or whatever, it's find that place where you can do and progress from there, whether that's, being in minimal or no pain, whether that's limited range of motion or whatever, just finding that starting point, I think can be so empowering to be like, okay, I can squat, I can do this. I just have to do it this way for now. And then all of a sudden you have a start point and you have a direction you want to go, and you just take those steps. But I think especially for me, through all of it, finding that starting point of where I needed to take my squat mechanically, load wise, fatigue management wise, psychologically, all of those things, that was the big step. So yeah, I don't know, find a starting point.
That's awesome. As you're talking about distilling that down to a grade 8 level, you ever see those videos on YouTube where it's an expert talking about a concept at 5 different levels?
I don't think I have. That sounds great though.
I think it's put out by Wired or some channel like that, but they have a 5 or 8-year-old. They have a high school student, college student, grad student, and then, some other industry leader. And it's really interesting. And taking it back to people like Mike T, Bryce Lewis, and other people that I personally agree with you, are very knowledgeable people. It's really fascinating and helpful, I think, to just watch them talk about things, and notice what they do. And you said it before, they'll pause to reflect on what they'll say and how they're going to say it. And I think another big thing is they'll say they don't know if they don't actually know the answer. And, they might try to find out later or do some research on that thing. But yeah, that's something that can earn respect from me real fast, is just recognizing where one's knowledge, or at least confidence, ends. Just because I think there's a little bit too much going on the interwebs where people seem to hold out like they know all the answers, but they likely don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right on. Well, Bryce, this has been fantastic, man. I know that a lot of people are going to come away from this with lots of good stuff to think about and start doing. So thank you for taking the time and coming on here to shoot the breeze with us and talk about these things.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Like I said, I looked through some of your past episodes and listened to a few of them, and everybody's listing their where they did their master's and where they did their PhD and then all these things. And I'm like, I'm going to be on this podcast. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Very, very happy to be able to discuss this. I think that for me, it's a great platform to talk about this. I feel like I haven't had a lot of these discussions publicly, and definitely not with people who are so entrenched in it from a clinical side. So I was really, really thankful to have had this opportunity to chat with you guys.
Our pleasure, man. And feel free to not say too much if you don't want to. But how's prep for nationals? You competing?
Yeah. I'll be competing in about 4 weeks here, and things are going really, really well.
Excellent.
Yeah, I might. So I was supposed to be competing against Eric Willis, who is a previous Raw World Champion. He decided not to make the weight cut. I think he's sitting at about 130 kilos right now. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes, and if it's feeling good, I might swing for the fences a little bit on my third attempt, because it might be a safe place for me to do that without Eric there.
All right. Well, I for one will be watching.
Are you still chasing the beast for the deadlift?
Yeah. If
anybody wants to watch a video that will make you train so hard, the powerlifter.
Yeah.
Is about, if you got to have 22 minutes. Yeah. You will be ready to go.
Yeah. I pretty proud of that one.
Absolutely. Also, question that has nothing to do with powerlifting. Bryce, do you like The Office?
I do. I love it.
Have you seen that they released the full version of Threat Level Midnight on YouTube?
Really?
Yeah. So
I've not seen that.
Everybody listening, take 22 minutes to watch The Powerlifter first, and then take an extra 24 minutes to watch Threat Level Midnight, and it'll be worth your while.
I feel like that would be very worth it. So there's your actionable things for the
there we go. Podcast there. We did it. We did it, boys. Bryce, where can people connect with you if they want to hit you up and connect with you for some of the services that you offer and get some sweet Calgary Barbell swag?
So I am Calgary Barbell pretty much everywhere. My personal Instagram is Bryce_CBB. We are CalgaryBarbell.com. We're Calgary Barbell on Instagram. We're Calgary Barbell on YouTube. Gets pretty repetitive. So if you're looking for us somewhere, just punch in Calgary Barbell and we're probably there.
It's awesome. Well, man, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Quinn, John, always a pleasure.
Yeah, this was great, man. Bryce. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
And thanks for having such an honest discussion about this. I think it's really important that we're able to talk about things like this openly.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to do it.
We'd like to thank Bryce Krawczyk for coming on the show. You can check out the show notes for links to be able to follow Bryce and all the awesome stuff that he's doing. And of course, thank you to my homies, Jared Maynard and John Flagg, for steering this ship alongside me. And thank you, the clinical athlete community, all 6 of you, for joining us on this journey of knowledge and improved practice in both the gym and clinic. If you want to dive even deeper into the clinical athlete community, you can check out all that the Clinical Athlete Forum has to offer, which includes our academy courses, amazing discussions and networking with professional clinicians and coaches, as well as students, and just our overall hub of knowledge in regards to athlete health and performance. Thanks, everyone, and talk to you soon.